All right, so today we're going to go over urinary system anatomy on these models. So here we have a model that has three different depictions of the kidney, from gross anatomy to various blow-ups of the microscopic anatomy. With the gross anatomy, you see the kidney bean shape of the kidney with its convex lateral surface and its concave hilus here in the medial side. The outer portion here is called the capsule, the connective tissue capsule. The histological regions of the kidney include the cortex, just below the capsule, the medulla, where you find the renal pyramids and the renal columns, and then the pelvis here, where you find various different tubes that will be collecting the urine, called minor calyces and major calyces, and then the actual renal pelvis, which is this funnel-shaped tube here, which exits the hilus to become the ureter, which will take the urine then down to the urinary bladder. We also see here in the hilus the entrance of the renal artery, and it begins to break up into the segmental arteries, the lobar arteries, the interlobar artery as it passes between the renal pyramids in the column, to the arcuate artery, to the cortical radiate artery. We also see the venous drainage of the kidney here, where blood exits via the renal vein. The renal vein then is formed as the cortical radiate vein drains into the arcuate vein, then into the interlobar veins, and then back ultimately to the renal vein. We'll go through the microscopic anatomy on a different model. Right? A couple of other structures you can appreciate here on this gross anatomy are the tip of the pyramid, called the renal papilla. Okay? Now we go to this middle section of the model here, where we have, just for reference, this is a lobe of the kidney, which includes a pyramid in the medullary region, and then a piece of the cortex out here. Right? Remember, the defining structures between the cortex and the medulla are those arcuate arteries and veins. So we do have interlobar arteries and veins here in this model, which then give rise to the arcuate arteries and veins, and then the cortical radiate artery and the cortical radiate vein. Branching off of that cortical radiate artery, you have the first part of the circulation that's going to be considered part of the nephron, the afferent arteriole, which feeds to the glomerulus, which is the filter, the efferent arteriole, which then becomes the peritubular capillary networks, a venule, and then cortical radiate vein. We also have depicted here the various portions of the kidney tubule system of the nephron. You have Bowman's capsule here, which is associated with the glomerulus. Then you have the proximal convoluted tubule, which leads to the descending limb of the loop of Henle, the loop, the ascending limb, the distal convoluted tubule, and then eventually the collecting duct. Okay? This third part of the model here shows a blow-up of the renal corpuscle, which is the combination of Bowman's capsule and the glomerulus. But we also have depicted here the afferent arteriole, right? The juxtaglomerular apparatus in terms of the juxtaglomerular cells here. We have the glomerulus itself with the podocytes of the visceral Bowman's membrane, the efferent arteriole. We also have a little piece of the proximal convoluted tubule with all its little microvilli there, and then the distal convoluted tubule with the macula densa cells here. And then this obviously is Bowman's capsule. Okay. Now, for gross anatomy of the kidneys, we have this model, or of the urinary system in general. So we still have gross anatomy of the kidneys, right? We have some of the histological anatomy, cortex, medulla, pyramids, and the calyces, right? The circulation. But then what this depicts is sort of the orientation of the kidneys with respect to the bladder. So you have the ureter, which will take the urine all the way down to the urinary bladder, and we have the urinary bladder depicted here. It has a lining with a transitional epithelium, right? Here's the uretic orifices. You have the bladder wall, the muscle of the bladder wall here, and then you have an outer connective tissue membrane as well. You have the internal urethral orifice, which leads to the urethra, and then the external urethral orifice, which leads to outside the body, and then the urethra itself. We also have here the smooth muscle sphincter that regulates micturition or emptying the bladder, and then the external urethral sphincter, which is skeletal muscle. Okay. We also have orientation of the bladder and the different urethras of both the male and the female here in the pelvic sagittal sections. This also can show you a lot of the reproductive structures as well. Finally, we have one of my favorite models, mostly because it's kind of difficult for the kids, a blow-up of the nephron here. So this is a really big blow-up of the nephron. So for orientation, this is the cortex, the medulla down here. These are the arcuate arteries and veins. This is the cortex region up here. You have the cortical radiate artery giving rise to the afferent arteriole, the glomerulus, the efferent arteriole, the peritubular capillaries, right? Venule, cortical radiate vein, and so on and so forth. We also have Bowman's capsule here, the proximal convoluted tubule, which leads to the descending limb of the loop of Henle, the loop itself, the ascending limb, the distal convoluted tubule, which then comes back over here, drains into a collecting duct. So that's the urinary anatomy on our models.